In the cramped hall, Ink and Hunger sat at the same table. Hammering his seal against the council table, Lucas Brenner cut through the shouting and smelled wet wool steaming from the villagers' coats. Snow tapped the shutters like thrown pebbles. 3 men stood red-faced over a map of the forest, and an old woman held a splintered stool leg as if it were proof of murder. No more speeches, Lucas said. At 27, he wore the magistrate's black coat as though it had been made for him alone. The law names each boundary. The law will settle this. A murmur moved across the room. Hans Reuter, who owned 2 oxen and half a sawmill, jabbed a thick finger toward the charcoal burner by the door. Then asked him why his sons cut beech from my side of the ridge. Old Dieter Schramm did not lift his head. Ash had settled into the lines of his hands, and the smell of smoke clung to his cloak. My sons cut deadwood, he said. Your men marked living trees in the common stand. They marked more after dark. The common stand feeds all, Lucas replied. I have the records. He opened the village book and turned the pages with quick, dry fingers. Inked columns, dates, names, fines. Order lived there. He trusted it more than he trusted memory. Then Greta Vole, whose husband had died the previous thaw, stepped forward with the broken stool leg. Write this too, Herr Magistrate. My hearth has gone cold. My youngest eats crust soaked in hot water. Last night Hans's steward drove my boy from the woodpile with a stick. The room shifted. Hunger had a smell of its own, sour and sharp beneath damp wool. Lucas felt it press against his neat sentences. He disliked the feeling and stiffened against it. If each house grabs what it wishes, he said, we will have theft, then blows, then graves. I will inspect the ridge myself tomorrow. Until then, no one enters the forest. Dieter raised his eyes at last. They were pale, steady, and old. Tomorrow will not warm a child tonight. Lucas met the stare and gave a thin smile. Age is not wisdom, Master Schramm. Books spare us from old mistakes. Several heads turned. No one spoke. The only sound was the fire sinking in the iron stove. Dieter stepped closer. Then hear a thing not written in your books. When a hearth goes cold in the Harz, the Ashenfrau may sit beside it before dawn. She answers one who asks the right question. Ask for gold, and she leaves. Ask for power, and she leaves. Ask wrongly, and you will come home with less than you carried. A few villagers crossed their arms against a draft that no one else felt. Lucas almost laughed, yet the room had gone still in a way he could not command. I need no mountain ghost, he said. Dieter took a coal-black twig from his pocket and laid it across the open law book. Then settle the forest by noon tomorrow. If you fail, go to the burned kiln above St. Andreasburg. The old women know the path. Hunger has no patience for pride. The ridge of marked trees. By noon the next day, Lucas stood knee-deep in snow among the beeches above the village. Men from 3 households followed him in a loose line, each carrying an axe turned downward by his order. Frost had silvered the bark. Red boundary marks showed on trunk after trunk, some old, some fresh, some cut across one another in haste. On the ridge, the forest held more arguments than firewood. Lucas measured distances with a cord and compared them against his notes. The figures did not fit the land. A stone named in the record had split years ago and slid downslope. A brook had changed course. What the book held straight, the mountain had bent. Hans Reuter pressed close, breathing hard through his nose. There. The line runs from that stump to the broken stone. My father swore it, Dieter answered from behind him. Your father swore many things when timber prices rose. The younger men began to mutter. One planted his boot beside another family's sled. Another gripped his axe haft too high. Lucas lifted his hand for silence, but the mountain wind tore his words apart. Then a crack rang out. Not an axe, a child's cry. Greta's eldest boy had slipped through crusted snow near the gully and vanished waist-deep into a drift over running water. Dieter moved first. He threw himself flat, reached with a branch, and shouted for rope. Lucas dropped the ledger case from his shoulder and crawled forward on his stomach until ice water soaked his sleeves. The boy's fingers were blue and shaking. Together they dragged him free. The child coughed, then clung to Dieter's coat with both hands. Greta fell to her knees in the snow and wrapped him in her shawl. No one spoke of property lines while the boy trembled against his mother and the brook hissed under its white lid. That silence should have helped Lucas. Instead, it unsettled him. He looked at the men, at the crossed marks on the trees, at the widow holding her son, and he knew he could not judge this matter before dusk. Not honestly. Back in the village hall, people waited for his ruling. Candles smoked. The room smelled of cabbage water and cold leather. Lucas stood before them and heard the weakness in his own breath. I cannot settle the forest tonight. A chair scraped. Someone cursed his delay under his breath, then bit the word back when he saw Greta's face. Hans struck the table with his fist. You forbade cutting. Then you bring no judgment. What do we burn? My records are old, Lucas said. The admission scraped his throat. The ridge has changed. I will seek another way before morning. Dieter, standing near the stove, said nothing. He only looked toward the shuttered window where darkness had thickened over the mountain. Lucas dismissed the room and packed a lantern, bread crust, flint, and gloves. When he stepped outside, Dieter waited beneath the eaves. Snow dusted the old man's cap. You came to mock, Lucas said. I came to warn. Dieter tied a strip of red cloth around the lantern handle. Wind eats light on the upper path. Keep this where your hand can find it. At the burned kiln, do not ask what will happen. Ask what is yours to do. Lucas almost refused the cloth. Yet his fingers closed over it. The fabric felt warm from another man's pocket. Do you believe she lives? He asked. Dieter pulled his cloak tight. I believe cold hearts make proud men listen at last. Lucas climbed after moonrise. The village lamps shrank below him, each one small and wavering. Snow squeaked beneath his boots. Fir branches carried heavy white loads and gave off a dark resin smell when the wind brushed them. He had told no one but the charcoal burner where he was going. Even so, he felt the eyes of the whole village on his back. If he returned empty-handed, hunger would sharpen into blame. If he returned with a tale, they might laugh. The mountain offered no comfort to either fear. Near midnight he found the kiln, a low circle of blackened stones half buried in drifted snow. An old hut leaned beside it, roof sagging, chimney broken. No light showed, no footprint marked the clearing but his own. He entered and found a hearth full of cold ash. A woman sat beside it. Questions by the dead hearth. She wore a gray dress the color of chimney dust, and ash lay on her sleeves as if she had risen from the hearth itself. Her hair, bound in a plain knot, held no frost though the room was colder than the clearing. Lucas saw no sign of age in her face, yet he felt old caution in the way she watched him. She waited by the dead fire as if heat still answered her. He set down the lantern. Are you the Ashenfrau? She looked at the dead fire. That is your first wrong question. The answer stung him more than mockery. He pulled himself straight. The village below faces famine. Men fight over timber. Tell me which family speaks truth. That is your second wrong question. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the hut. Truth does not always sit in one chair. Lucas swallowed and felt his pride rise like heat. He had climbed through a night that bit his cheeks raw for this. A woman in gray giving him riddles beside a cold hearth. Then what question must I ask? She lifted a handful of ash and let it fall back through her fingers. Bring me 3 answers you can carry without paper. 1 from a hungry child. 1 from a tree cut in winter. 1 from the hand you trust least. Then ask again. The hut darkened. The lantern flame bent. Lucas stepped forward, but the hearth was empty. Only ash remained, smooth except for the print of a woman's hand. He did not sleep. Before dawn he descended to the village with the taste of soot in his mouth and anger in his chest. Yet anger could not hide the plain fact that he had no better path. His first answer came from Greta's house. Smoke failed to rise from the chimney. Inside, frost filmed the corners of the single room. Greta stirred a pot of turnip peels in water while her children sat wrapped in blankets. Lucas crouched before the youngest, a girl with chapped lips and solemn eyes. He felt foolish at once. If the forest gave one gift today, what should it be? The child did not answer at first. She watched the steam drift from the pot and vanish. Then she pointed, not to the firewood stack, but to her brother's torn boot drying by the stove. Time, she said. If the wood burns tonight, Mother must walk again tomorrow. Lucas looked at Greta's cracked hands, at the patched basket by the door, and understood the child's meaning after a moment. Wood meant heat, yes, but also hours not spent searching frozen slopes for twigs. Hunger was not only an empty stomach. It was labor that swallowed the day. His second answer waited on the ridge. He went alone, carrying an axe he did not plan to use. At the common stand he found Dieter shaving bark from a fallen beech. I came to ask about a tree, Lucas said. Dieter nodded toward the trunk. Then ask where the sap sleeps. Lucas frowned. The old burner laid his palm on the wood. A green tree cut in deep cold burns badly. It spits, smokes, and wastes half its strength. Deadfall, Seasoned stacks, coppiced growth by the lower road, those feed a village better than prideful felling in the high stand. Men strike what is near and tall because it looks rich. Winter punishes that impatience. Lucas touched the beech. The bark was hard as fired clay under his glove. In his book, timber was quantity. Under his hand, it became time, moisture, labor, smoke, and waste. The mountain had more grammar than his pages. For the third answer, he delayed until evening. He knew already whose hand he trusted least. Hans Reuter opened his door with no welcome in his face. The merchant's hall smelled of stored grain, pitch, and old coin. 2 stacks of cut pine stood under the eaves of the courtyard, covered with canvas against the snow. You forbade cutting, Hans said, yet you come to inspect my house after dark. I came to ask what you fear, Lucas answered. Hans gave a short laugh. At last, a decent question. He led Lucas into the shed and pulled back the canvas. The wood beneath was dry, straight, and enough for weeks. Do you think I hoard because I enjoy the village's hatred? Last thaw, bandits hit the road from Klausthal. One took my brother's horse. Another winter like that, and a man with fuel becomes a target before he becomes a neighbor. He thrust a billet into Lucas's hands. Feel that. Dry. Worth coin in Goslar. Worth a beating here. If I open my stacks without rule, stronger houses will take more. The poor will still beg. Then all will blame me for not having enough. The wood was light and warm from the shed, and Lucas hated that the man's fear felt ordinary. Not noble. Not shameful. Ordinary. A husband guarding his store because winter had a long mouth. That night Lucas climbed again to the burned kiln. Snow had begun to fall in thick, soft flakes. They settled on his shoulders without sound. The woman in gray sat where she had before. He did not ask her name. The price of warmth, she pointed to the hearth. Speak your answers. Warmth began when pride bent its back to the rope. Lucas knelt, though he had not meant to. A hungry child asked for time, not wood. A winter tree gives less than men imagine if they cut without thought. In the hand I trust least fears disorder more than loss. The Ashenfrau stirred the ash with 2 fingers. Now ask. Lucas looked into the gray hollow where no coal glowed. He had come for a ruling, a sign, some hidden map of justice that would spare him choice. The wish felt small now, and childish. What is mine to do? He said. At once the hearth breathed heat. Not flame, heat only, sudden against his face and palms. In it he smelled bread crust, pine smoke, wet wool, and the bitter scent of iron pots left too long on coals. Village life, stripped down to its need. Count the hours before you count the logs, she said. Open what is hidden, cut what can return. Bind the strong first, or the weak will pay twice. Eat after the oldest hearth is lit. Lucas held the words in silence. She went on. You wear law like a winter coat. Good, keep it, but coats do not grow grain, and ink does not carry faggots uphill. If you judge from a chair, the mountain will judge over you. He should have asked for more. He should have demanded plain instructions. Instead he bowed his head because the rebuke landed true. When spring comes, she said, the ridge must not look as this room does. She lifted a blackened hand and pressed ash across his wrist. Go. He left before fear could catch up with him. At dawn he rang the council bell himself. Villagers came grudgingly through the snow, drawing cloaks tight. They expected another delay. Hans arrived with his jaw set. Greta stood in the rear with her children. Dieter leaned by the stove, watching without rescue in his eyes. Lucas remained standing. He did not sit in the magistrate's chair. Listen once, he said. Then argue if you must. The room quieted. No house may cut the high common stand this winter. That wood is green and will waste in the hearth. Hans Reuter will open his dry stacks under guard and sell at the old rate for those who can pay. For widows, the sick, and houses with children under 12, the village will cover the cost from spring grazing fees in my office reserve. A stir ran through the room. Hans started to protest, but Lucas raised his hand. In return, he said, Hans's storehouse and road teams will stand under village protection. Any theft from his stacks will be judged as theft from all. Strong households will spend 2 afternoons each week hauling deadfall and coppice wood from the lower road to the square. Names will be posted. I will haul with the first team. That last line changed the air. Men who had prepared objections looked up sharply. Lucas continued before courage failed him. Greta Vole and others in need will receive fuel first, because a cold house costs more than wood. It costs labor, health, and children's strength. In 3 days we will mark a new boundary after the thaw signs are read by men who know the ridge, not only by old ink. Dieter's pale eyes narrowed, then softened by a grain. Hans spoke through his teeth. And if my stack's empty, then mine will empty next, Lucas said. He unpinned the brass seal from his coat and set it on the table. I will sell the silver frame from my mother's mirror and buy more from the lower valley before I let this village break apart around dry boards. Silence followed. He had not planned to say it, yet once spoken, the offer steadied him. Pride had spent much, it could spend this too. An old shepherd near the wall coughed into his fist. You would haul wood yourself, Herr Magistrate. Lucas nodded. If I order backs to bend, mine bends first. The first laugh in many days rose, short and surprised, from somewhere near the door. Tension loosened, not into cheer, but into a shape men could work with. That afternoon Lucas shouldered a rope harness beside millers, herdsmen, and charcoal men. The load bit into his chest. Pine bark scraped his gloves. By the second trip his breath tore in his throat and his city boots leaked at the seams. No speech in the hall had prepared him for the weight of green resentment carried uphill with wet branches. Yet the square began to fill. Women sorted lengths by dryness. Boys stripped twigs for kindling. Greta, cheeks red from the cold, handed Lucas a cup of hot broth so thin he could see the wood grain of the cup through it. He drank as if it were a feast. For 6 days the work held. On the 7th, trouble came. A pair of brothers from the upper lane tried to take wood before their turn and struck Hans's steward when he blocked the cart. The steward fell into the snow. Axes rose. A cry went up across the square. Lucas moved before he thought. He stepped between them and seized the nearest axe shaft below the blade. The wood jolted his frozen palm. Down, he ordered. One brother, wild-eyed with shame and cold, spat near his boots. My mother coughs blood at night. Lucas did not let go. Then say that first. The man's shoulders shook. Not rage now, exhaustion. She cannot last another week in that room. The square had gone quiet again. In that stillness Lucas heard the true edge of the winter. Not greed, not even anger, but people cornered by need until every insult felt like a last insult. He lowered the axe himself and turned to the stacked wood. Move Frau Albrecht's house to the front list. Tonight. No one objected, not even Hans. That evening, with the first snowlight fading from the roofs, smoke rose from more chimneys than it had in many days. When the chimneys answered, the hard weather broke slowly. First the icicles shortened under noon light. Then ruts appeared in the road. Then one morning water dripped from the church eaves with a sound like patient counting. By spring, the chimneys spoke in thin blue lines instead of silence. Lucas spent those weeks outside more than in his office. He learned which widower could still split oak cleanly, which lane drifted shut first, which house hid illness out of pride. He kept records each night, but now the pages followed the village instead of ordering it from above. When the thaw opened the ridge, he walked the boundaries again with Dieter, Hans, Greta, and 2 farmers older than all the maps in his cabinet. They read the land by roots, old coppice stools, drainage lines, and stones almost swallowed by moss. Where the old marks had invited conflict, new markers stood plain and shared. At one clearing Lucas halted. 3 fresh stumps rose from the snow-soft earth, raw and bright against the dark needles. Someone had cut them in secret after his ruling. Hans cursed under his breath. Greta crossed her arms. Dieter crouched and touched the stump rings. Not for profit, the old burner said. Poor cuts, night work, desperation. Lucas looked downhill toward the upper lane. He thought of Frau Albrecht coughing in her bed, of boys ashamed to beg, of men who feared winter more than fines. The old Lucas would have searched for names and made examples. The new thought came slower and cost more. Mark the loss, he said. Then we plant 6 in spring. Hans stared at him. No punishment. There will be labor, Lucas said. Whoever cut them will help set the saplings. If they do not step forward, the lane will plant them together. Hidden cutting stripped the common stand. Open work must mend it. Dieter's mouth moved near a smile. That answer would not shame a book. Lucas almost returned the old sharpness, then let it pass. Do not tell the book, he said. By late spring the village had changed in ways no decree could force. People still argued. Hans still counted every load. Greta still spoke with the hard plainness of one who had buried too much. Yet the square held new wood racks built by shared hands. Coppice plots near the lower road stood fenced for regrowth. Each house owed hauling days by season, written large enough for all to read. On the first mild evening, Children chased one another around the pump while soup smells drifted from open doors. Lucas stood at the edge of the square and rubbed the faint gray mark that still crossed his wrist. He had tried to wash it away many times. It never darkened, never faded. Dieter came beside him with a bundle of young beech saplings over one shoulder. "We plant above the brook tomorrow." Lucas nodded. "I will be there." The old man followed his gaze to the roofs. Smoke rose in thin blue lines, no longer frantic, no longer scarce. "Did you find her?" Dieter asked. Lucas watched a child carry kindling into Greta's house, careful as if carrying eggs. "I found a hearth," he said. Dieter accepted the answer. That night, after the village slept, Lucas climbed alone to the burned kiln one last time. Mud showed through the last patches of snow. The hut stood open to the spring wind. Inside, the hearth held only pale dust and one small coal, cold to the touch. He placed beside it a new iron poker from his own kitchen and a loaf still warm from the baker's oven. Steam lifted from the crust for a moment, carrying the smell of rye into the ruined room. "Thank you," he said to no one he could see. The wind moved down the chimney stones with a low hush, like breath through old ash. Then it was gone. Lucas left the loaf there and walked back before dawn. In the valley below, the village waited with its patched roofs, hard people, and waking fires. He no longer mistook rule for wisdom. One kept order, the other kept people alive.